As we begin our second Shabbat without our shuls, this is a second Shabbat that shuls are closed. Every single Shabbat, I prepare the cholent, I order the kiddush, make sure there's a sponsor for the kiddush, make sure there's a chazan in place, make sure the reading of the Torah is done. And this is the second Shabbat that all that is not taking place. And this Shabbat, I think thousands, tens of thousands of shuls are open in people's homes. So there's a tremendous chizuk that every single person can give. Every single person in your home, you are the cantor, you are leading the services, you are giving the sermon, you are preparing the cholent, you are sponsoring the kiddush. So we wish you all a wonderful Shabbat, second Shabbat without our shuls, but the shuls have moved to our homes. So I want to just share with you a little bit of inspiration in lieu of the sermon that I always give in shul. So there's an interesting Torah law this week about the sacrifices. See, the sacrifices, every single time somebody would need to give a sacrifices, so normally the standard was it was a fixed nature. So it was either a lamb, or it was wine, oil, doves, an ox, a goat. Depending on why you were bringing it, there were many different kinds of sacrifices. But in 6 cases, what the Torah says is that the offering depends on who's bringing it. For example, a woman, after she gives birth, is obligated to bring 2 offerings, a lamb and a dove. But if she's poor, she brings 2 doves instead. So there's 6 times. It's called the korban oleh v'yored, going up and down kind of sacrifice. And it depends, if you were rich, you would bring one thing. If you were poor, you would bring another thing. So for example, another example is the leper, a metzorah. A metzorah undergoing purification from his state of impurity. He has to bring 2 lambs, but if he's a poor man, he brings 1 lamb. So there's certain different criteria, different things. One who transgresses an oath, one who by mistake swears falsely, one who inadvertently enters the holy temple. There are many different scenarios, many different ways, and in these 6 kinds of cases, which is called the korban oleh v'yored, it depends. If you were rich, you brought one thing. If you were poor, you brought another thing. So here's an interesting question which comes up on this. What happens? You see, if the person obligated to bring the sacrifice, so let's talk about a leper from a metzorah. If the person obligated to bring a metzorah is a poor man, in theory, he can ask somebody else, a friend, to do the sacrifice for me. So let's say I have a commitment to give charity. I committed to give $1,000 to charity. Technically speaking, a friend of mine can do this commitment for me. He can give the $1,000 to charity instead of me. Technically speaking, if I commit to give a poor man money, I don't need to be the person to do that sacrifice. Somebody else can do it instead of me. So here's our dilemma this week. What happens if a poor man was obligated to bring a sacrifice, and then the person who decided to take upon himself the obligation of the poor man was a rich man? Does he have to give the sacrifice of a rich man, which is him, or does he have to give a sacrifice of a poor man, which is the person intended to do it? So let's say the poor man's sacrifice is worth $100. If he were a poor man, he would have to give a sacrifice worth $100. But if he's a rich man, he would have to give $1,000. So if the person obligated to give is a poor man, and the person doing it for him is a rich man, what does he have to give? The rich man or the poor man? So what do you guys think? Take a moment to think about that. So Maimonides writes as follows. If a rich man says, I'm assuming the obligation of a poor man, he has to bring the rich man's offering. So if the poor man was supposed to give $100, and a rich man was supposed to give $1,000, even though the obligation is of a poor man, the rich man has to give $1,000. Now, here's the perplexing thing which Maimonides writes. What happens if it's the other way around? What happened if the person obligated to give was a rich man, so you had to give a sacrifice worth $1,000? Now a poor man says, I want to fulfill the obligation for my friend. So if he were a poor man, he'd have to give only $100. So what does he have to give now? When was a rich man fulfilling the obligation of a poor man? So he told him you have to give like a rich man. But now when it's a poor man fulfilling the obligation of a rich man, what do you think Maimonides writes? Shockingly, he writes, he has to give the obligation of a rich man. It doesn't make sense. It doesn't conform. In other words, like this. If the person obligated to give was a poor man, and the person who wanted to give for him was a rich man, he had to give a rich man sacrifice. And if it's the other way around, if the rich man was obligated to give and a poor man wanted to give in his stead, he still had to give the offering of a rich man. Doesn't make sense. How does that make sense? And it's here where we learn a tremendous lesson. Tremendous lesson. You see, Abaya says in the Talmud, Ein ani ela b'deah. What does rich and poor mean? Rich and poor is in your knowledge. If you are a rich man, it's in your head. If you're a poor man, it's in your head. You can only be poor in your mind. It's a mindset. And I'll explain what this means. First, a story. You see, in 1946, the sixth Lubavitcher Rebbe, the previous Lubavitcher Rebbe, was raising money for publishing some books of the Tzemach Tzedek of the third Lubavitcher Rebbe, and he asked a Jew to contribute money, a large amount of money for 1946 standards. I don't know what it was, maybe $5,000. Large amount of money. And the man said, yes, I will give it. And the Rebbe, the previous Rebbe, blessed him for this act of charity. And subsequently that year, this man made a ton of money. He made many more times money than he would have ever anticipated. And he was able to pay that donation and have a large amount of money left over. He became a rich man. And the Lubavitcher Rebbe then said, when this Jew made the commitment, he actually didn't have the money. And even, we are told that on Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, it's allocated, mi yichye, mi yamut, who will live, who will die, who will become rich, who will become poor. It's allocated, it's decided in heaven how much money a person will make to the penny. So even though it was allocated and from above wasn't allocated this amount of money for this person, nonetheless, when this person made the commitment itself opened up new channels of wealth for him, and because of that he was blessed to become a very wealthy man. By committing this sum to charity, he became a very wealthy man, and he made a keli, made a vessel for God to bless him with this enormous amount. You see, in life, you can't wait till everything sets up in place. Sometimes you got to give yourself the mindset of wealth. So if a poor man decides to commit to the sacrifice of the rich man, in his mind he's already a rich man and he's obligated to give the $1,000, the sacrifice of the rich man. You see, once he commits in his mind to give the sacrifice of the wealthy man, he is wealthy, because wealth is in your head. If you commit to that, you are that. It's also focus only on the good. And this idea is the same idea where we find ourselves now presently with this coronavirus, this pandemic, this terrible pandemic spreading, infecting across the whole world. New York now is the epicenter, overtaking even China and Italy in terms of sick people. And we have to be very careful about this. But at the end of the day, we have to know that even though we're in isolation, and a guy emailed me today, he said, I feel like I'm in prison. I'm in prison in my own home. It's all in your mind. Take this opportunity to spend Shabbat with your family. Take this opportunity to spend time with your family. Take this opportunity to enjoy a beautiful Shabbat. May I suggest that everybody, you anyways not going out, you're not driving anywhere, that keep Shabbat 100%. Switch off your mobile device. It's the greatest blessing you can possibly have, to switch off that cell phone, switch off that WhatsApp, switch off that Facebook, switch off social media for 25 hours will be the greatest blessing you have. So take this time, appreciate it, to spend time with your loved ones, spend time with yourself, heal yourself, think about what you want to do when you come out of this isolation, because nobody can imprison you. No coronavirus can imprison you. It's all in your mind. May we all enjoy the greatest Shabbat, the most beautiful Shabbat with each other, with our families. Have a wonderful Shabbat. Shabbat Shalom.